Welcome to Performance Talk with your hosts, Yul Gordon and Chris Costa, where professionals discuss the latest news and developments in the profession and all areas that affect sports performance, strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, performance, and much more. Listen now to your host and this week's guest, next on Performance Talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for Season 8 of Performance Talk with myself, Yul Gordon, and my partner, Chris Costa. Chris, how you doing over there, man?
I'm well.
You're always well. That's the same question I always ask, but I like to know. So
it's cold.
So you want to introduce our guest today, or you want me to?
I don't really think he needs much of an introduction.
Not much. Not much.
We do have Mr. Tim Gabbett on the show. You've done a lot of podcasts. You've done a lot of research. You're all over the place. Your name is known. Hopefully most people have read some of your research at least.
Yeah, well, look, thanks for having me on, guys. I hope some people are reading it, but occasionally, I think you put it out there sometimes, and if you go back a few years, there wasn't social media, so you had no idea if people were actually reading it or not. You were just kind of putting it out there and hoping that they were.
Well, I can guarantee you that everybody that's serious about what they're doing has read at least some of your work, and we appreciate having you on the show and having given our listeners the privilege of your insight and wisdom. Tell us a little bit about tell the listeners a little bit about you and then what you have going on today.
Well, I suppose it's best to kind of start where I am right at this point and then work my way back in time.
Okay.
So I'm a sports scientist, but I consult to essentially any team, any organization that has high performance needs or wants to reach high performance. So at the moment, I'm working with a national rugby league team in Australia. We've got a period of time here where we've got a specific project we're trying to work on with a couple of players or a few players. But if once this is done, who knows where I'll be? I could be in the States, I could be in Europe, I could be in South America. My background in sport, I played a lot of sport when I was young. I played heaps of different sports, heaps of different team sports. I ran track. I joke that I was born blessed with 100% slow twitch fibers. So I was good at middle distance, long distance, cross country.
He said, I thought you were going somewhere else, and he said 100% slow twitch.
Yeah. So I would have loved just one fast twitch fiber, but that could be seen as a weakness, or you can make it a strength.
Right.
So what I lacked in speed and skill, I just tried to make up for in effort. So a big part of anything I did in sport was based on effort. I could contribute to a team based on effort. I could handle reasonably high volumes of high intensity, longer high intensity intervals just based on effort. So from there I just studied and worked pretty hard. Took that effort component that I had from training and sport and just applied it to other areas of my life, and that's pretty much the story to where we are now.
Well, that effort piece I can definitely relate to. Being vertically challenged, I was never very tall. I can't say I was ever small, but I was short. So a lot of times in sport, you get looked at and it's like, you're too short to play this position. We need somebody bigger. I'm like, he's 190 pounds. I'm 190 pounds. We, you know, you're telling me that I'm just too short to play a position that doesn't require height, So that's just one of those things, one of those lifetime things you carry around that, like you said, you take it and you apply that same effort to being or proving yourself in sport to everything else. So we fast forward, we're going to jump forward a little bit, and you are a well-known sports scientist. I'm going to start this off with a question that I always ask, and then I will let our resident sports scientist, Dr. Chris Costa.
Don't call me doctor. Not there
okay.
yet.
Leave me alone,
don't
man.
put that bad juju on me.
Then I'll let him, because I know he's got some questions. But my question always is, how much data is too much data?
I think probably the answer to that is just you got to start with a question.
Okay.
Right. So the question is what drives your data, and drives the data collection. If you don't have a question, then essentially you're just collecting numbers looking for a question.
Gotcha.
So, in general, I would say, I've got a performance question that I want to answer. But then my second question is, what's the least amount of data that I need to answer that question?
Okay.
So, it'll depend from question to question, but I think over time I probably use less data now than I did maybe 15 years ago. And I think it's just part of understanding that the numbers can only tell you so much. That at the end of it all, you've got to develop relationships. You've got to develop some trust with the athletes you're working with. And you're around them a fair bit. You get to know them pretty well. You get to feel what makes them tick. You get to learn what makes them tick. It doesn't mean you don't use the data. You still use data, but those relationships, the conversations, that's all a type of data as well. It's
right.
being we're kind of analyzing some of those conversations in our head all the time, and we're developing a picture. We're developing an understanding of what it is this athlete, how it is that they get up for training, how it is they get up for games, what it is that they struggle a little bit with. And so we're using that in our, we can call it an algorithm, but it's an algorithm that we have in our head about.
Right. I got you.
Yeah. So I would probably lean towards just think what's the least amount of information I need to answer the question I've got.
So I think you first wrote, or I should say probably studied maybe around 2015, but you published, I think in 2016 for the first time about acute chronic workload ratios. What, if anything, has changed now? I saw you just recently published this month. Didn't read it yet, but I'm just curious, if anything in your mind has changed from what you previously believed, if it's still the same, if we've kind of expounded more upon that.
Well, look, that 2016 paper was an interesting one because I think a lot of people, I'm not sure how many people actually read the paper. I think that people liked the colourful graph, but I don't think, I don't know how many people actually read the paper. Now, all you have to do is read the abstract there, and the last two lines of the abstract is essentially what I believed then, and pretty much what I believe now is that if you can, and let's think back to that time, and even for the 15 years before that, there was a real change in the way practitioners approach training and training load. it was training was considered a little bit of well, if you do too much, you're going to break. Could we use training load information to predict injuries before they happen? And should we manage players away from training to prevent soft tissue injuries? That was the thinking for a long period of time around how we're going to use data. And I'm not just talking about organisations that I'd come in contact with. It was everywhere. I think it might have started in Italy. There was some stuff in Sydney and Australia, and then there was different organisations that were contacting me with that same question. What is the load that's too much? When is it going to cause a problem? So that thinking was just not in alignment at all with my beliefs around training and my experiences with training, my personal experiences with training. My personal experiences with training were that I've very rarely been injured through training. In fact, it's the exact opposite. When I'm training well, when I'm training hard, I'm tired, and I'm sore, but I feel stronger. I feel more resilient. I feel unbreakable. Right. So the last two lines of that paper was what the paper was about. It for me anyway. It was, you build to higher loads. If you do it in a systematic way, it's going to build resilience. It's going to build robustness. And the second part is, by doing that, you're going to have more of your athletes available for selection each week, not fewer. They're not going to be broken. They're going to be more robust. So I mean, there's a lot of context around those two statements in the paper. So in general, I would say my view around those two lines hasn't changed at all. But I would say there's some other things in there that have changed, right? So the acute chronic ratio, there's either people who use it a lot, or there's people that don't use it. There's people who love it. There's people who don't like it. And to me, that was never really the groundbreaking part of the paper. That was not the biggest part of the paper for me. It never was. It was, we want to get to higher loads. And the question is, well, how are you going to get there?
Right.
Are you going to use a 10% rule? Well, maybe you could do that, but it works sometimes, but not others. You could use the acute to chronic ratio, so you could load relative to your capacity, or you could just take this and see how you feel. Right? There's a few different ways you can get there. The evidence around those two things, the acute chronic ratio and injury risk, and high chronic loads and injury risk, are the interesting part, though, because there's probably a lot more evidence for the acute chronic ratio and injury risk than there is around high chronic loads and injury risk. But my strong belief was that high chronic loads, protecting against injury, that was the big thing for me. But the evidence is probably not as strong as the evidence for the acute chronic ratio and injury risk. So when you spike workloads, injury risk tends to go up. Now, we're 10 years on from that. As soon as I published that paper, pretty much as soon as it was out, we were thinking, well, there's still only 20% risk when you spike workloads. That means 80% chance that you're not going to break. So what is it about a spike in workload? Why is it that some athletes can handle that spike in workload? The majority of athletes can handle that spike in workload, whereas others can't. And that's where we went from thinking, well, all spikes in workload are a problem, to going, well, no, not all spikes in workload are going to cause injury. What is it that separates the robust from the fragile? And that's where we moved into the moderators of that relationship. Things like well-developed aerobic fitness and strength, age, previous injury history, high chronic load. All of these are kind of moderators of that relationship. So if you have those moderators in your favour, that reduces your risk. If you don't have them in your favour, then that might ramp up your risk. So there's a bit more context around that paper and where it's changed, I suppose.
The paper kind of met quite a bit of controversy. I mean, it was all over Twitter, up and down, left and right, people that were for it, people that were against it, people that were saying you were a genius, people that were saying you were crazy. You had the naysayers and the periodization gods that were kind of trying to counter this philosophy that, we can just spike training and build more resilient athletes. And yet, again, some that were spiked ended up having issues. And so to me, it kind of elucidated a lot in that what we already knew, in that every single athlete has to be treated with a highly adaptable programming protocol, that nothing concrete can in fact be the end-all be-all result for every single athlete out there. And in order to know that, we can't just look at small blocks of data. We need to look at larger blocks of data, even historical data from an early training age on to even a later training age, and see how the athlete has amended themselves and adapted to things.
Yeah, look, I would agree with pretty much all those points. Yes, programs have to be individualized. It's not a one size fits all. Yes, we have to be adaptable. Yes, we have to consider context with our training programs, that we want to build to higher chronic training loads, but we don't want to spike those loads. In general, I would say that's not a great idea. But in other situations, if you've got the best player in the world, let's say we're going into the Super Bowl final and he hasn't played for 4 weeks, but he's a potential match winner, and you know that playing in the Super Bowl is going to cause a spike in load, what are you going to do? Are you going to play him or you're not going to play him? For me, I'm going to back the match winner. But there's equally, to your point around, it would help to know a little bit more historical data. You and I both know that's not always the case. That people come into physical therapy clinics broken, and they're we're talking general population now, that they may not collect data, training data.
Right.
So there's a whole heap of historical information that we'd like, that's hard to get sometimes as well, without digging a little bit, and then that takes time when in a very short session that you've got with them. So yeah, it's not always easy to get the data that you want in order to develop a good program for people. So there's a whole heap of issues around that.
Have you seen what you would believe to be maybe more buy-in on this thought line, in terms of modulating training intensity acutely, as opposed to creating these long programs that had this, whether it be undulating or it be stepwise, or it be pyramided? Have you seen a buy-in of basically microdosing and then managing each athlete or each group of athletes on a daily basis, as opposed to just looking at, okay, how did the week go? How did the month go? How did the past 3 weeks go?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's an either or approach, Chris. I would say we do both of those things. So we say we've got a goal of, we've got three solid weeks of training.
leading up to our first. We've got a national public holiday here, a bank holiday coming up in a week. So we've got 3 hard weeks of training, and we've got a goal in mind of what we want to achieve in that 3 weeks. But equally, we are collecting a fair bit of information here. So we'll have some external loads. We'll have some well-being responses to that. We'll have some physical performance outputs in terms of counter movement jumps or strength scores, and we can be. We've got the plan in place for that block, but we're kind of looking at it on a day-to-day basis to see who is adapting well, responding well to the program, and who is struggling. And then you've got a decision to make. You've got a decision to make. Well, you're only a few days back from your holidays, so yeah, of course you're going to be a bit tired. So you're just going to have to dig in a little bit and find something. Or, if it's a severe negative response, if you start getting a reactive tendon, then you start really modifying the program. So there's, I think you're doing both of those things. And I don't necessarily, if I'm in a block, I'll have a plan in place, but I would call it agile periodization. So it's a periodized approach, but I'm adjusting it depending on, there's a whole heap of factors. But if I've got a high speed running session or high intensity running session, and I've had 2.5 weeks of really solid work, and I'm fraying at the edges, then I've got to work out, well, do I push here or do I pull back? And that's kind of the decision coaches are making all the time.
Have you found a specific objective metric that you now believe is most reliable when it comes to assessing a CWR? Or is it more of still of a group of metrics? And obviously the subjective piece is highly important too, right?
Yeah, I guess the simple answer is no. I think it'll depend on the sport, but so for baseball, I think a general measure of arm health tends to work well in terms of a response variable. And now what they use for arm health can vary. It could be just a pain score on some sort of VAS scale, or it could be something a bit more objective in terms of perhaps it's grip strength, or perhaps it's like a mobility score in terms of can you reach around behind your back, and is your mobility decreased? So it'll vary from sport to sport. If you start seeing strength decline, so if your isometric strength is starting to decline in response to load, and I'm not just talking one day, I'm talking there's a trend there.
Yeah,
it's trending down. Then that you need to look into those things. But I think in a lot of cases you can negate a lot of these issues just through having a well planned week. Generally in most athletes who are healthy, I will use a high-low approach. And if you have a pretty decent high-low approach, you know they're going to be fatigued on a high day. At the end of the high day, that because you're consolidating the stress, and then you plan the rest of the week accordingly. So if you've got a high day on Monday or Tuesday, let's say Tuesday, then you got to think, well, what am I going to do on Wednesday? Well, for us, it's going to be a day off. We're going to have a low day. Thursday, they might come back in and have a high day again, or a moderate to high day. So if you're doing that, then what's Friday going to look like? And it becomes a little bit of a lower day. and then Saturday becomes a higher day before we get the back end of the week, the weekend off. So we tend to modulate it that way with a high-low approach.
When I'm talking to a lot of strength coaches and performance guys, their primary goals, or what they're saying are their primary goals, is to be able to train. And the reason they train higher loads and try to do that consistently and all the time is so that they can compete at a higher intensity. And I look at them and I don't really know what that goal is. We all would like to train at higher loads in order to build that resiliency and that strength. But what are they really trying to say there, or what do you think they're trying to say? And how would they use the data that they can collect to accomplish their goal?
Well, I'll use a little analogy here. I talk about the floor, the ceiling, and time.
Okay.
So the floor is your athlete's current capacity. It's what they're able to do at this point in time. The ceiling is the capacity that's required when in those peak moments of play, and what you have to do as part of your job in sport. And then time is how much time have you got to get from the floor to the ceiling and get there in one piece. So if we work our way back from the ceiling, that's what I think you're talking about.
Yes.
Your strength and conditioning coaches are saying, I want our athletes to be able to perform the demands at a higher intensity. Well, that's part of it. Now the ceiling is, at some point in time, there's going to be a hard ceiling.
Yeah. Stop right here.
Yeah, in my mind, I have the perfect game that has no stoppages in play at all, and it's just end to end 80 minutes. Now that's a dream of mine. That would be the ultimate game. But if that's the case, then there has to be a hard ceiling at some point. The game is going to stop at some point. So, but what our strength and conditioning staff are looking for is you either want to be able to perform the demands of the game at a higher intensity, or you want to perform them for longer. You want to perform at the game demands for longer periods of play. Ultimately, we have talented athletes that are highly skilled, and there's a saying that skillful performance is constrained by physical limitations. So if you don't have the speed to put yourself in the gap, or if you don't have the aerobic qualities to keep up with the game, so the game's down one end of the field and you're down the other, then it kind of doesn't matter how skillful you are. You can be the most talented player in the world, but if you haven't got the physical capacities to put yourself in the position to influence the game, then it doesn't really matter. So that's what strength and conditioning coaches and performance staff are doing. They're trying to develop physical qualities to put you in a position to execute your skills. And obviously with all that comes, with appropriate training comes tissue tolerance and the ability to withstand those high loads, so that you become more resilient to those stresses. They pose less of a risk to you because you've been exposed to those stresses on a regular basis.
That exposure at regular intervals, I think for me that strikes a chord, because I've had several athletes over the past 6 months who, let's just say, when asked why they're not progressing, I look at them and I just tell them, look, 70% of nothing is at a passing grade. Only in baseball and horseshoes can you be almost there and get points for it. So, when we have 10 training sessions scheduled, and you make 6, we're not going to reach where we want to get to. So that's the kind of conversations I've had. But then again, when I'm talking to the parent, and I venture down this road some because I work with younger athletes a lot of the times nowadays. When I'm talking to parents, I try to explain to them why we need information, why the first few training sessions belong to me, because I'm assessing and I'm evaluating, where the athlete is. And oftentimes, the athlete is not where they think they are. And it's easier to tell the athlete than it is to tell the parent that, little Susie she looks fast, but she's not very fast. She's moving her legs really fast, but she's not covering any ground. That's why her game in the game doesn't look like it looks when she's in practice. So first we take that information and we learn that she's got to learn how to run. So, okay. So those were questions that popped up in my head as you and Chris were talking. One of the things I always like to ask here too is if I'm a newly minted sports science graduate, what are the things I need to know to be successful in the profession as you see it?
Okay, well, there are probably things that you may not learn in your degree. So, we can talk about X's and O's that you'll learn in your degree. You'll learn about physiology. You'll learn about biomechanics and movement analysis and strength and conditioning and nutrition. You'll learn all that stuff. But the things they probably won't teach you, or maybe they'll gloss over it, is it's a changing world from when I went through. Right. So everything's done online. You don't even have to go to some classes sometimes. You can watch it all online. I've known of students these days who have never actually gone to a physical class because they can watch all the lectures online, the recording online. So that's one thing I would say is if you're still in college now, go to the class, because that's where a lot of the discussion happens. That's where a lot of the debates happen. You should learn it, if you've got an unbiased person and a good lecturer, you should learn how to disagree appropriately.
Yeah. Yes.
Because you've mentioned social media. People don't know how to do that. They don't know how to disagree.
Terrible, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to go off down a rabbit hole, but social media for me sometimes just, it's a love-hate relationship. I love it for the connectivity and all that it brings, but I hate it sometimes because what are we doing? And why?
Yeah, look, I agree. I agree with you. I think there's, I try and focus on the positives. I think there's some,
right.
It's probably a net positive, but probably just, there's a lot of, I've met a lot of good people that I wouldn't have met otherwise.
Right.
And for that I'm grateful. But then there's some people there I just go, geez, like
I think we learn how as we get in and navigate that. Those of us who, as we get a little bit, those of us who are older and that get mature a little bit, we learned, okay, I don't have to listen to that. I don't have to click on that. So yeah, I disagree with it. I disagree with the way they're doing stuff, but I don't have to click on that and I don't have to engage.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of folks, a lot of youngsters anyway, feel like they have to engage for whatever reason. I don't want to sound like I'm blaming anybody or saying that's, putting them out there like that's the worst thing in the world. But you don't have to engage. If you disagree and you say something and it comes back to you and it's not in a professional light as you see it, then, there's disengage.
Yeah.
Disengage.
Yeah.
You don't have to continue.
Yeah. So in terms of the, students coming out, I would say that, you've got to be able, you can't just phone in a job, or you can't just sit online and watch the job unfold in front of you. You probably have to go into work and interact with people. So it's probably not a bad idea to start practicing it. I think you've got to be adaptable. You can't be too rigid in anything of your thinking, because things change in sport pretty quickly. As unfortunate it is, there's alliances even within a team. So,
right.
If you feel that this was your team and this was your job, and then those alliances change, then you might have to shift teams. So you have to be adaptable. You have to be adaptable in terms of your philosophy. Be open to some different approaches. That there's not only one way to solve a problem. There's lots of ways, and you don't have to have an either-or approach. You can use a combination of what appear to be contrasting philosophies. So there's, and you just, I just don't think you can be too rigid. You got to be adaptable in sport. So that's something that I don't think is probably, it's obvious, but I don't think it's something that's emphasized in degrees in university settings.
Right. Chris, this is one for you to expand on what Tim was talking about. How do you see that in you're in a university setting a lot of times, or have been since we started this podcast? How do you see that statement kind of as he unfolded it right there for the listeners?
I mean, it's highly dependent upon the situation, the environment, the type of students that you have, the major, how they perceive the major, in terms of how much they engage or involve themselves. I mean, I've had students that are probably going to be great practitioners in the field that don't really ask any questions. I've had students that are definitely going to be great practitioners in the field, ask a lot of questions. I've had students, like kind of like Tim alluded to, not necessarily knowing how to engage in debate, and essentially coming off as attacking one's philosophy. And it may not even be my own personal philosophy. It may be what's in the text, right? What's in the writings. Kind of based on, we'll go back to social media, kind of based on what they've read or they've seen and they think is, the gospel, because that person looks the part. So they must know, right? And communication, I think, is unfortunately something that, because of the digital age, we are now lacking in the ability to be able to communicate effectively and listen effectively, are now done behind a screen and not in person. And I think that detracts a lot from relationships. I think that whether they be platonic relationships or otherwise, it certainly detracts from those relationships and building something, and even properly highlighting what you mean and what you're saying and what you're doing.
Okay. That put both of those answers together. So let's go from the young professional or the student to the let's just say seasoned professional, the old guys who say, I don't need all that data. I don't need all that. I don't, how do we get some of our peers, Tim, to open their arms to data and not be, it goes back to the rigidness I think you were talking about before, and not be so rigid about it, but, just use a little bit, find out what you need. Like you were saying, what information would you like?
Yeah, look, I think, who knows what the motivation is for the seasoned guys to not necessarily want that, and of course, this is generalizing as well, because there's
absolutely we don't mind generalizing here.
Yeah. So I think probably all of it just comes back to relationships. What is it that the data, what is it about the data that might seem threatening? And is it the fact that you're a seasoned person and there's a younger person coming through who has a different skill set? That doesn't negate anything that you bring.
Right.
You've got your skill set that has served the purpose and will continue to serve the purpose, because that's your expertise. That doesn't mean that you can't develop skills in data analysis and interpretation. It doesn't mean that you can't work with that person coming in with those data skills. The reality is you're the seasoned professional, so you probably know the actual data that needs to be collected. You probably know the questions that
there we go.
you really need answers to. So you've got a lot of value to an organization. And I really hope organizations hear that as well, that you've got the seasoned professional. Don't be so quick to move them on, because they bring a lot of experience and intuitive expertise to the organization. They know the sport, they know the people, they know the challenges. So they can help drive a lot of these performance questions and get solutions to these performance questions. They may not be the ones doing the grunt work, but they can definitely drive them.
But I know that one thing you said right at the front of that statement was they intuitively, a lot of times know what questions to ask, what data to ask for, and that to me saves the sports scientists a lot of time, because now they don't have to learn the sport. They don't have to learn the people or the organization. You just go to the old guy sitting in the corner and you say, hey, what do we need to know? But all kidding aside, that the understanding that there's a place, I think there's a place for all levels and experiences in the world of strength and conditioning and sports science, because, some of the information is foundational, that it never goes away. And then there's new information that's coming in every day.
Yeah, that's right. And if you still like your role and you still want to be in that role, then that adaptability, that doesn't change when you're 30 years in the role. You still have to be adaptable. And that's one thing that's a constant in sport. Things change very quickly. Now, if we go back 30 years, it was probably the pendulum was one way. It was, we do this because we've always done it. It's
right.
It's all about feel. And then along came wearables or data analysis. And what can happen is the pendulum can swing back the other way.
Right.
Now that's a problem as well, because if the pendulum swings too far, you end up being a lab. And, we're about winning games. We're about developing a hard sporting team. So it doesn't mean that you throw one out or swing back the other way and then go, we'll just throw all our GPS units in the trash. We're you try and keep those swings in the pendulum small if you can, and don't swing too far one way or the other. Just try and have strengths in both areas. You still want to be a hard sporting team. You want to be whatever it is that you want to be described as.
Right.
But you want to be smart with it as well. If there's a smarter way to win championships, wouldn't you want that as well?
Yeah, I would think so. And the bottom line, like you're alluding to, is it's about the best athlete, the hardest and the best athlete, and the teams. We still want to win games and we still want to perform at a high level. So we don't want to be a lab, but we need some information.
Yeah.
In order to do our job. So yeah, I will tell you, with quite a bit of a level of pride in myself about sports science. I was not the guy early on about collecting a whole bunch of data. Now, when I started talking to Chris is the one that moved me towards understanding a better understanding of how to use sports science and how to we always collected data at some point. You get your maxes, you get your times, and you do all that stuff. But how are you using them, and what are you doing it for? So I have since known Chris, I give him credit for helping me develop just kind of my approach to data, and I call it the attack protocol. We assess, we go back and train, we test it. We identify it. We compare, attack. How you spell attack, man? Analyze, compare it, and know. So we're testing, we're analyzing, we're comparing it to what we did before, so we know going forward. That's how you spell attack. I almost left that one on the paper.
I like it. It's a good acronym.
So it's an acronym that keeps me in the data field, and in the kind of, I won't call myself a sports scientist, but thinking with that in mind, and when I gather data, why I'm using it, what I'm going to do with it, and so forth. And it also gives me an acronym to kind of throw at my athletes, and they say, "Hey, coach, why do you keep telling us to attack such?" And then I just show them my little acronym card. So this is what we're doing. And they laugh at me, but we keep going because it's all in getting them to buy into what we're trying to do. And when they laugh about it a little bit, then we start to relax. That relationship gets built, and we continue to move forward.
I
Chris,
think there's some misunderstandings when it comes to sports, the term sports scientist. I think that anyone that obviously does research is a scientist, but anyone that is curious about learning more about anything, no matter what field it is,
I agree.
You're a scientist.
100%.
Because you're willing to try something new. You're experimenting. It doesn't have to be in the context of the lab or the research office or the metabolic cart for us to become a better understood, more practical practitioner that can apply certain aspects to certain athletes and apply different aspects to other athletes and basically accrue the same results, which is enhanced performance, built up resilience. I mean, we want to put this terminology, data science, baseball uses it a lot, soccer now uses it a lot.
Right. I mean, it's all over the place.
Scientists, those are data miners. Those are people that write code. That's not us. I mean, maybe some of us can, but we're not code writers. We're not actually creating the algorithms. We're asking the questions that lead to the data scientist creating an algorithm for us that we can then utilize to try to get the desired effect or the desired goal or the desired outcome. And, again, continuing to modify that until we get it right.
Well, I don't know about you, Tim, but I know for me, I like to break things down to their simplest level, because then that's the way I'm going to communicate it to my athletes. And to be quite honest, if I think about it like building blocks, foundation, framework, build out and stuff like that, it flows better in my brain, which makes it flow better out of my face when I'm talking to people. So that's the way I think about it. But I know some professionals that they get frustrated around the big words and the terminology and those kind of things. And I think that initially is what, takes some coaches and makes them go, let's just put that over here for now, and then we'll come back to it. So what are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
I think you should be, like, some people, when we talk about the either or approach, we're talking about a reductionist or a systems approach now, right?
Right.
And and the systems people would say, there's a problem with the reductionist approach. But to me, I look at what you've just said, and that's a strength. There's no shortage of people who can make sport more complicated than it needs to be.
Exactly.
And what they do is they make the mistake of thinking that athletes, there's some smart athletes out there, no doubt, but they make the mistake of thinking that athletes are smarter than what they are. And so they make it complicated. There's a whole heap fewer people who can understand topics well enough to make it simple so that other people can understand it. And that, what you just described, is a real strength. It's if I don't think athletes in general buy into big, long-winded spiels about why something's happening. In the vast majority of times with my athletes, I need something catchy. I have a plan in place for a session, and I know what I want to achieve in the session. Then I've got to take that physiological understanding of what I'm trying to do, and I've got to put it into terms that this athlete's going to understand, and put it in a way that they're going to attack that session. Now, if I explain it in a physiological terms, it's going to put them to sleep.
You're going to get the glazed over eyes.
Yeah, so I've got to get them amped up and ready to, and I don't have a lot of time to do that. So I've got to. What's the simplest way I can get that across to them? So yeah, I think that's a real strength that you got. I'd be focusing right in on that.
See, Chris, I tried to tell you. I just give Chris a hard time, man. So don't worry about that. Our listeners already know.
They're all aware.
Yeah, kind of how we go back and forth sometimes, take little jabs, but that's okay. I think I'm winning though.
Oh, you definitely win. I don't play that game.
Yeah, that's what he does. I don't play that game, but anyway, Tim. So what's coming up for you? Let me say it this way. We know what you're doing right now. What are you looking forward to doing in the future in this world of strength conditioning, sports science, etc.? What's something that you have that you may not have planned yet, but that you want to do?
Well, I'll tell you this. I don't look too far ahead. I try and stay in the moment. So at the moment, my sole focus is with this team, with the players that I'm working with, and I'm very clear on what my role is and what it is that I'm trying to develop. Down the track there will be other jobs, and those jobs will change. there is a job that's coming up with an Olympic sport that what we're really trying to do is one of the challenges that comes up in these sports is performance support staff, and that could be sports medicine, nutrition, psychology, strength and conditioning. For the last 20 years, the problem has been coaches don't plan. Now, whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. I think coaches do plan.
Yeah, I do too.
It's just in a slightly different way than what the textbook might say. So they either have the plan, and it's actually a very thorough plan, but it's in their head, it's not down on paper,
right.
Or perhaps they've only shared the plan with the really key people that they're going to be working most closely with, or perhaps they haven't shared the plan at all. So that's going to be a big project for us as we try and work out what are the true gaps. What are the true gaps in these Olympic sport programs? Is it a communication issue, or is it a technical issue? Where is the limitation? Where is the gap? Is there communication? Is there planning being done, but it's not being communicated? Or is there a technical limitation around, oh, geez, I just don't know how to plan? And then it's about getting everyone in that performance support team with the coach, understanding of the plan, buying into the plan, having some ownership of the plan, and then getting that team or the athlete going in the right direction. So that's one of the big challenges that are coming up in the future. But like I said, I don't look too far ahead. I don't, who knows what's around the corner tomorrow. So I stay in the moment.
Well, that's not looking too far ahead is actually, and with my background in psychology and everything, that's probably a healthy thing to do. And stay in the moment. And I would say, good for you, but a lot of people do look forward, and sometimes to a detriment too far. I think there's a limit on how far you need to be looking for. I mean, I'm never going to retire, so I don't even think about retirement. So I always tell myself there's always one next thing to do, but I don't know what that is yet. So I don't force myself to plan something that's not ready yet. So I stay in the place I'm supposed to be. Chris, do you have any final questions for our distinguished guest today?
No, I do not. Just thanks for joining us today, Tim. Taking your Sunday morning out. Hopefully you'll get to enjoy the rest of that. What looks like gorgeous weather behind you.
It is gorgeous. It's gorgeous here, but it's pretty hot. It's close to 100 degrees, and it's 80 to 90% humidity. So,
that sounds like
taking it right now.
It sounds like July down here in Texas. I try to run from that when I can, but it's
it's been good talking to you both, and good hearing your perspectives on it as well. Like with podcasts, I kind of feel like some people are sick of hearing my views on things, so I'm more interested to hear a different view, and I appreciate hearing both your views about things, and just different ways of attacking the same problem, but just different ways of going about it. So thanks for the chance to have a chat with you.
Well, we appreciate your time. And Chris, go ahead, take us out of here.
This has been Performance Talk with Ewell Gordon and Chris Costa. Today's guest was Dr. Tim Gabbett. Thanks, guys. We'll see you again soon.